Imagine sitting across from someone you've loved, trusted, and built a life with for years. You look into their eyes, but for the first time, the fog clears. The optical illusion shatters. You realize that the person staring back at you does not exist. They never did. You haven't just discovered a few flaws or uncovered a standard lie. You have just unmasked a covert narcissist. And in that exact microsecond, an invisible, high-stakes countdown clock begins to tick. Most people make a fatal tactical error here. Their heart rate spikes, their adrenaline surges, and every human instinct screams at them to confront the fraud. They want to point a finger and say, "I see you. I know what you are." Do not do that. If you do, you are stepping onto a landmine you won't survive. See, a covert narcissist is the most dangerous variant of the predatory personality types. Unlike the grandiose narcissist who demands center stage and broadcasts their ego, the covert operative operates in the shadows of victimhood. They play the martyr. They use humility as a weapon and vulnerability as a trap. They spend decades meticulously engineering a flawless counterfeit relationship, a psychological mirror designed to reflect exactly what you need to see while they quietly drain your emotional, financial, and psychological resources. But what happens when the mirror cracks? What happens when you finally decode the subtle anomalies in their behavior? The micro-expressions of contempt that flash across their face for a fraction of a second when you succeed, or the calculated pity they use to keep you small. When you unmask them internally, the dynamic of the relationship changes instantly. You shift from an asset to a liability. And in the world of behavioral profiling, we know one absolute truth. When a predator realizes their cover is blown, their objective shifts from exploitation to absolute elimination. If you show your cards, if you let them see the shift in your eyes, you trigger what is known as a narcissistic injury. To protect their fragile, manufactured ego, they will initiate an immediate, scorched-earth smear campaign. They will rewrite history, turn your friends against you, and weaponize your own secrets before you even realize you're in a fight. They will destroy your sanity just to prove their innocence. That is why you cannot fight. You cannot argue. You cannot seek closure from a ghost. In this video, we are going to break down the exact behavioral metrics of the covert narcissist's counterfeit world. More importantly, I am going to give you the operational blueprint for the only strategy that actually works: how to execute a cold, quiet, undetectable exit. If you want to protect your mind, your reputation, and your future from total liquidation, you need to understand the hidden psychology of the escape. Do not move, do not react, and do not skip a single second of this breakdown. Your survival depends on what you do next. In behavioral science, we don't look at what people say. We don't even look at what they want us to think they feel. We track metrics. We measure the delta, the distance, between a person's projected identity and their actual, real-time behavioral output. When you are dealing with a covert narcissist, you are dealing with a masterclass in counterfeit engineering. The grandiose narcissist is easy to spot. They walk into a room like they own it. But the covert narcissist walks into a room pretending they were hurt by the person who owns it. They wear a cloak of quiet sensitivity, introversion, and perpetual misunderstanding. They don't brag about their achievements. They sigh about how their brilliance is constantly overlooked. They weaponize your empathy against you. They look for high empathy targets because an empathetic person will spend years trying to fix a manufactured wound. But the relationship is entirely counterfeit. It is an emotional Ponzi scheme. They take your trust, your attention, and your validation, and they use it to fund their own psychological deficit. In return, they give you a simulation of love. It's a script. They mirror your values, your hand gestures, your vulnerabilities, and your dreams. Eventually, the mask slips. No one can maintain a simulated persona under 100% operational pressure indefinitely. You start noticing the anomalies. You notice that when you are sick, their distress is somehow greater than yours. You notice the covert gaslighting, the subtle passive-aggressive comments disguised as constructive criticism. I love how you just don't care what you look like when you go out. That isn't a compliment. It's a microdose of psychological poison designed to erode your baseline confidence. Then comes the moment of unmasking. The day you look at the ledger and realize the numbers don't add up. The day you realize that every single sacrifice you made was real, and every single emotional return they promised was fake. Your immediate human instinct is going to be confrontation. You want an apology. You want validation. You want them to admit that they broke the contract. Listen to me very carefully. Abandon that expectation immediately. When you confront a covert narcissist, you are trying to hold a shadow accountable. They cannot accept your version of reality because doing so would cause their entire internal identity to collapse. Their psychological survival depends on them being either the hero or the victim, never the villain. The moment you say, "I know what you're doing," you have compromised the mission. You have just told the saboteur that you found the bomb. What do? They detonate it early. The second they perceive that you see through the mask, their behavioral programming switches from covert assimilation to hostile liquidation. They will instantly play the victim on a massive scale. They will call your mutual friends, crying, telling them how worried they are about your erratic behavior. They will twist your words, take your reactions to their abuse out of context, and present them to the world as evidence that you are the unstable one. By the time you try to explain your side of the story, the narrative has already been set in concrete. They will ruin your reputation to preserve their illusion. So, what is the counter strategy? How do you survive a counterfeit relationship? You run, but you do it quietly. In the intelligence community, when an operative's cover is blown, but they need to escape without drawing fire, they don't make a scene. They execute a ghost protocol. They slowly, systematically detach their emotional energy from the target environment. You must implement the gray rock method, but with absolute tactical precision. You become the most uninteresting, unreactive, boring piece of matter in their universe. You stop feeding their need for drama, validation, or conflict. If they try to provoke you, you respond with flat, monotone neutrality. That's interesting. I see. Okay. If they try to love bomb you to pull you back in, you remain polite but entirely hollow. You don't argue, you don't defend your character, and you don't explain your decisions. Why? Because explanations are behavioral data. When you explain yourself to a narcissist, you are giving them a map of your boundaries and your pressure points. You are telling them exactly how to calibrate their next manipulation tool. Silence gives them nothing to work with. You must build your exit strategy in the dark. Secure your finances. Protect your physical space. Gather your support system outside of their network and emotionally disengage. You do not owe them a closing argument. You do not owe them a final conversation where you explain why you are leaving. Seeking closure from a covert narcissist is like trying to draw blood from a stone. You will only bruise your own hands. Your closure does not come from their confession. Your closure comes from your data collection. You saw the truth. You mapped the behavior. You decoded the counterfeit. That is more than enough. When you are ready, you walk away. No drama, no grand speeches, no backward glances. You simply cease to exist in their operational orbit. You block the channels. You sever the ties, and you guard your peace with an iron fist. The ultimate defeat for a covert narcissist isn't your anger. Anger is a reaction, and reaction is fuel. The ultimate defeat for a narcissist is your absolute cold, indifferent absence. When they look into the space where you used to be and realize they can no longer pull a single spark of emotion out of you, that is when you win. Unmask them in silence, plan in secret, and exit without a sound. The human brain is wired to seek patterns, and in social interactions, it is fundamentally optimized to assume a default setting of truth and reciprocity. When you enter a relationship with a covert narcissist, you believe you are engaging with a human being who operates under these same evolutionary laws. You think you are interacting with an individual who has an ego, a set of flaws, and a genuine, albeit imperfect, emotional landscape. This is your first and most critical tactical error. You are not looking at a person, you are looking at a highly sophisticated psychological infrastructure. It is a simulated ecosystem engineered for a single operational purpose: the extraction of psychological fuel while maintaining absolute deniability. Unlike the grandiose narcissist, whose identity is loud, fragile, and demands constant public adulation, the covert narcissist builds a fortress disguised as a sanctuary. The mask they wear is not a simple piece of plastic they put on and take off. It is a sprawling network of behavioral subsystems. It is made of calculated humility, weaponized vulnerability, and a carefully curated aesthetic of introverted sensitivity or quiet martyrdom. They position themselves as the perpetual underdog, the misunderstood genius, or the deeply caring soul who has been repeatedly broken by a cruel world. This infrastructure is designed to trigger your natural empathy and lower your defenses. By presenting themselves as fragile or victimized, they trick your brain into skipping the standard vetting processes you would normally apply to a stranger's behavior. You stop looking for anomalies because your subconscious mind has categorized them as someone who needs protection, not someone who poses a threat. Underneath this sprawling infrastructure, however, lies an insatiable, hollow core that requires a constant stream of external validation, control, and attention to prevent its own collapse. Because they cannot generate their own sense of self-worth internally, they must harvest it from you. But they cannot do this openly because an open theft would expose their true nature and destroy the righteous, victimized identity they have built. Therefore, the infrastructure must operate with complete stealth. Every compliment they give you, every moment of intense listening, and every shared vulnerability during the initial phase of the relationship is actually a diagnostic test. They are mapping your psychological landscape, identifying your emotional vulnerabilities, and calculating exactly how much investment you are willing to make to keep them happy. They build the relationship to look like a partnership, but it is entirely unilateral. It is a system where you provide the actual emotional currency, the real empathy, the real support, the real loyalty, and they give you a highly polished, counterfeit reflection of those exact traits. Unmasking this type of individual is uniquely dangerous because you are not just discovering a lie, you are threatening to dismantle the entire structural integrity of their psychological survival mechanism. The mask is what keeps their deep-seated shame and chaotic internal void contained. When you begin to see through the infrastructure, when you notice the coldness behind the sympathetic sigh, or the flash of contempt when you succeed, you are looking directly at the machine behind the curtain. The infrastructure is designed to defend itself at all costs, and the moment it detects that its camouflage is failing, its programming shifts automatically from hidden extraction to hostile countermeasure execution. Every human being operates with an internal behavioral baseline, a set of predictable patterns, emotional responses, and ethical boundaries that define who they are under normal conditions. When you meet someone new, your brain immediately goes to work establishing a file on them, tracking their words, actions, and reactions to map out this baseline so you know what to expect. The covert narcissist understands this evolutionary mechanism perfectly and explicitly exploits it by manufacturing a false baseline designed to trap you. They do not establish a baseline of strength or superiority. Instead, they establish a baseline of fragility, high morality, or deep emotional wounding. They present themselves as the gentle soul who has been deeply mistreated by past partners, toxic family members, or ruthless colleagues. By broadcasting this state of perpetual, elegant victimhood, they subconsciously force you to alter your own behavior. Your brain registers their apparent fragility and immediately issues a command to handle them with care. You walk on eggshells not because you are afraid of them yet, but because you are a good person who doesn't want to cause them any further pain. This is the baseline trap in full execution. Once they have successfully conditioned you to view them through this lens of vulnerability, they gain a catastrophic tactical advantage. They can now slip toxic behaviors right past your radar because your brain will automatically contextualize those behaviors to fit the false baseline you've accepted. When they drop a passive-aggressive comment, give you the silent treatment, or subtly withhold affection, you don't recognize it as a hostile, manipulative maneuver. Instead, your mind rationalizes it based on the fraudulent file you have on them. You tell yourself they are just having a hard day, or that their past trauma is flaring up, or that they are simply too sensitive for this harsh world. You become their defense attorney, arguing against your own intuition. This baseline also weaponizes your natural human tendency to look for the best in people and to give those we care about the benefit of the doubt. In a healthy relationship, the benefit of the doubt is a standard safety net. In a relationship with a covert narcissist, it is a blank check for psychological erosion. Because the baseline they established is so rooted in goodness, humility, or suffering, any data point that contradicts it feels jarring to you. Your brain experiences cognitive dissonance, a painful clash between the reality of their toxic behavior and the illusion of their gentle persona. To resolve that discomfort, you choose to trust the established baseline rather than your own eyes. You assume that you must be misinterpreting things or that you are being too sensitive, which is exactly the psychological state they want to induce. The microaggressions they deploy are deliberately kept small and low-key so that they never quite breach the threshold of an outright crisis. They stay in the gray zone, chipping away at your self-esteem, your independence, and your sanity, piece by microscopic piece. By the time you realize that the baseline was a complete fabrication, your confidence has been systematically dismantled from the inside out, and you have spent months or even years accommodating, protecting, and making excuses for the very person who was quietly planning your emotional liquidation. When you finally piece together the anomalies and decipher the behavioral codes, a moment of profound internal clarity occurs. You experience what can only be described as the aha moment, the sudden, terrifying realization that the person you are dealing with is entirely fraudulent. Every instinct inside you, forged by a lifetime of standard human socialization, urges you to weaponize this new data immediately. You want to initiate a confrontation. You want to look them in the eyes and deliver a brilliant, devastating cross-examination that forces them to face their own malice. This is the exact moment where the trap snaps shut, because you are assuming that you are dealing with a rational adversary who possesses a conscience and values truth. In reality, you are dealing with a volatile psychological system that reacts to exposure the way an animal reacts to a life-threatening physical predator. By letting them know that you see through them, you are not engaging in a healthy, dramatic showdown that leads to closure. You are triggering an immediate, catastrophic narcissistic injury, and you are initiating a hostile operational threat response. To understand why this is so dangerous, you must understand that the covert narcissist's entire existence is built on maintaining an illusion of absolute moral superiority and victimhood. This illusion is their oxygen. It protects them from a deep subterranean well of toxic shame that they are completely incapable of processing. The second you reveal that you have unmasked them, you aren't just accusing them of a mistake or a lie. You are threatening to annihilate their entire manufactured reality. Their brain does not process this as an interpersonal conflict. It registers your knowledge as an existential threat. When a predator realizes its camouflage has failed, it immediately abandons the assimilation phase and shifts into total neutralization mode. If you show your cards, you lose every single ounce of tactical leverage you possess. The covert narcissist will not break down, weep, and admit their faults. Instead, they will instantly activate a pre-programmed scorched-earth defense protocol designed to neutralize you before you can expose them to the rest of their network. They will weaponize every single vulnerability you ever shared with them during the counterfeit relationship, using your private pains as ammunition to construct a narrative where you are the unstable, abusive, and dangerous one. They will launch a massive, preemptive smear campaign within your shared social, familial, or professional circles, crying to anyone who will listen about how much they have suffered at your hands. Because they have spent months or years establishing a baseline of fragile innocence with those people, the crowd will naturally side with them. You will find yourself trapped in an engineered nightmare where you are forced to defend your own sanity, your own character, and your own memory against a flood of coordinated lies. Your desire to confront them comes from a place of emotional exhaustion and a need for justice, but in the theater of behavioral operations, it is the equivalent of announcing your ambush to the enemy before firing a shot. The aha moment must never be shared, celebrated, or broadcasted to the target. It is not an invitation to a trial. It is a quiet, internal signal that the mission has completely changed and that your only objective now is a silent, tactical extraction. To fully grasp the psychological trap you are caught in, you must strip away all emotional sentimentality and look at the relationship through a purely transactional lens. In a healthy human connection, there is an invisible, organic ledger of mutual care, respect, and emotional investment. When you hit a rough patch, you draw from that shared equity to pull each other through. But a relationship with a covert narcissist is entirely built on a counterfeit ledger. From the very first interaction, they were not investing in a bond. They were executing an ongoing, calculated financial and emotional transaction. They entered your life with zero real capital, offering instead a highly convincing simulation of empathy, loyalty, and love. You, assuming the currency was legitimate, poured your actual life savings into the relationship, your time, your unconditional support, your mental energy, and your hard-earned trust. You believed you were building wealth together, but you were actually funding a parasitic drain. The covert narcissist treats your qualities not as traits to admire, but as assets to liquidize for their own psychological maintenance. They use your empathy to shield themselves from accountability, your social standing to elevate their own reputation, and your baseline stability to anchor them whenever their own chaotic inner world threatens to cave in. This is why the dynamic changes so violently when you stop playing along. The moment you begin to dry up the supply, whether because you are too exhausted to keep giving, because you start setting basic human boundaries, or because you have internally unmasked the fraud, the counterfeit currency stops working. When they realize they can no longer manipulate you into handing over your energy, their operational strategy shifts instantly. They do not mourn the loss of a partner, they assess the loss of a resource. And in the cold calculus of a predatory personality, when an asset stops producing yield and becomes a liability, it must be liquidated immediately. Asset liquidation in a counterfeit relationship means the total destruction of your credibility, your peace of mind, and your emotional stability. Because you know the truth, you are now a walking threat to their survival infrastructure. They cannot allow you to walk away intact with a clear mind and a clean reputation, because an intact survivor is a witness who can expose the fraud to the next potential target. Therefore, they pivot to a strategy of total psychological bankruptcy. They want to leave you so broken, so self-doubting, and so thoroughly isolated that you lack the structural integrity to ever speak out against them. They will systematically strip away everything you built during the time you spent together. They will claim ownership over your shared successes, rewrite history to make it seem as though they carried you through your darkest times, and cast you out as an ungrateful, toxic burden. They treat your past kindnesses not as memories to cherish, but as tools to mock your naivete. You must realize that there is no hidden reserve of love that you can appeal to, and there is no past history of shared happiness that will cause them to show you mercy. The ledger was fake from day one. When the transaction concludes, they do not see a person who loved them, they see a depleted mine. Accepting this reality is brutal, but it is the only realization that will save you from spending a single additional second trying to negotiate a settlement with an entity that entered the deal solely to bankrupt your soul. The final and most crucial phase of surviving a counterfeit relationship requires the absolute abandonment of conventional human closure. In standard interpersonal dynamics, when a connection dissolves, we are conditioned to expect a final conversation, a debriefing where both parties lay out their grievances, express their pain, and arrive at a mutual understanding or a polite farewell. When dealing with a covert narcissist, attempting this standard protocol is an act of operational self-sabotage. You must understand that any emotional exit, any dramatic final confrontation, or any attempt to explain why you are leaving is not a path to freedom. It is merely handing them a fresh injection of behavioral data. When you stand in front of them and display your anger, your tears, or your meticulously reasoned arguments, you are showing them your exact psychological map. You are revealing where you are hurt, what you are sensitive to, and precisely what kind of leverage still works on you. They do not hear your pain as a plea for empathy, they process it as a technical diagnostic report detailing how to recalibrate their next manipulation tactic to pull you back in or destroy you completely. This is why the only functional strategy is the execution of a cold exit, what is known in high-stakes behavioral security as the ghost protocol. A cold exit means you completely detach your emotional energy from the environment without providing a single warning sign, an explanation, or a closing argument. It requires you to become completely dead weight to their system. You implement the gray rock method with flawless military precision, stripping your speech of all inflection, your face of all expression, and your text messages of all punctuation and emotional subtext.